more successful collaboration. Now that has a lot to do with working for the second time, you know, because the second time you're not afraid of each other anymore. You're not afraid to say something like, well, I don't like that.
So during the time that I was there, he was working on Starship Troopers, which was directed by Paul Verhoeven. So that was a very intense time because, as you can imagine, a lot of music in that film, and Paul's very intense. We had a lot of fun with him. But that was the project that I worked on mostly with him, you know, along with some side projects, but that was the project I managed at the studio for about a year.
That was a unique experience, certainly for me. Again, I can only talk from my perspective, but I would put that on a 13-week time frame, probably the longest I've ever been involved with a scoring process. Paul Verhoeven, an extremely intense person, and he and Basil had a great relationship. Paul would come over maybe twice, 3 times a week, and sit with us for an hour or two, sometimes 3 hours, and go through the mock-ups and express, as I said, very intensely, you know, what certain motifs should be or what kinds of sound effects we were going to be dealing with that we either had to avoid or cut through.
Well, the great thing is Paul had confidence in Basil, so it wasn't like Paul was standing over him, watching him, you know, write every cue, but Basil still got pretty tortured over every piece of music that he ever wrote. So when he would have a listening session with Paul, I would have left him at maybe 7 o'clock at night, like, okay, go home and go to sleep, or not go home now, but get some sleep. And I'll have come home in the morning, he would have slept at the studio, you know, his hair would have been all disheveled, he wouldn't have had anything to eat, and because he was, you know, writing on his piano, which he did, pen and paper, on his piano, waiting for Paul to get there. But once Paul got there, it was always fine.
Basil was, you know, he really was a very old school sort of composer. Dramatist. He was an old school dramatist. He would spend the time on the theme. He would really sit there, and it was, you know, and he would be sitting there with his old beat up piano with the cigarette marks in it, and that would be his duty, was to get that theme right and make the director hear his movie on the piano.
This thing, whenever we did music was always very serious. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he stopped. You know what I mean? Like when you're doing music, it's very serious, and he's amazing at it. But yeah, the focus definitely seemed to shift towards, you know, living life. One morning, instead of working, we grabbed my wife, grabbed Mia, hopped on the boat, went down to Redondo Beach, had breakfast right like on the water, just pull down there, dock the boat, get out, eat, hop back in the boat, drive back up, and then start playing the keyboard, you know? I can't imagine anybody else I know doing that ever, you know, just the stress and the pressure and the deadlines, like to take that many hours out of a day to go do something like that was, you know, I thought it was amazing.
Basil and I shared over 35 years together, a lifetime of wonderful memories. The births of our 2 daughters, watching him conduct full orchestras all over the world, weeks spent sailing on our boat off the coast of California. But I guess if there was one memory I'd like to share with you today, it would be the sound of Basil playing his piano. Often I would wake up in the middle of the night, well after midnight, and I'd hear the sound of a new melody, a melody that would one day become the theme to Conan the Barbarian or Free Willy or Lonesome Dove. Nothing will ever touch me as deeply as the sound of Basil playing his piano in the middle of the night.
It's definitely one of the memories that is the most powerful, I think, because from the time I was born, there was music. The day they brought me home from the hospital, he got Big Wednesday, you know, and to this day, I hear Big Wednesday and I hear the story of my life. You know, I remember hearing his music and feeling like it was my own soundtrack. It was a soundtrack for our family. And I'm so thankful to have this music to share with the world, but also because it's like an emotional scrapbook for me. I can put in a CD or watch Red Dawn or something, and all these memories come back, things that I haven't thought of for years, and thoughts of my father at the piano and being a kid, and in the music I hear our story, and I feel like it's also a way to look at the past but also continue a relationship with him now that he's gone, and I'm very happy to have that.
It really taught me a lesson about the importance of family and relationships, and they were so involved with each other, and she was so involved in his career. And it was always this moment, it was without fail, where Basil would be out conducting. Basil did all his own conducting. And I'd be at the board, and Bobby'd be sitting down the end, usually next to the orchestrator or the reader or whoever. And there'd be this moment where a melody would pop out, and it would be the melody of the film. I mean, there was always 3 or 4 different themes, but a melody would pop out, and Bobby and I would just turn our heads and just look at each other with this wry little smile, knowingly, saying, there it is, there's Basil. And it was, I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about those moments now. I mean, he was an amazing writer.
My father was not always the most accepting person of his own talents and what it was bringing to him. He was almost too humble for his own good. You know, which it's a blessing and a curse, because I think he was humble enough to kind of let the stuff be really genuine. He never forced anything. It was never phony. He was a very genuine man, and his art reflected that genuine quality in him. And I think that he didn't understand why people liked the music so much. He never did. He really didn't. And I think only at the very, very end of his life, you know, when he went to Úbeda, Spain, and realized, you know, the adoration that what it really was, and he finally accepted it, you know. And I think that that's why it was such a wonderful moment for him and for everybody who shared it, because he was allowing it to happen.
It was 2 weeks before the Úbeda Film Festival last year, and I visited Basil in his hospital room, and he had just had a surgery, and I had not seen Basil for a few years, and I was afraid to open the hospital door because I had no idea what was going to be on the other side. And I opened the door, and it's Basil. It's no different than when I went to his house the first time. Yes, he was in pajamas and he was laying down, but it was Basil. He was joking, he was full of fire, and the fire in his belly was he was going to Úbeda. And I'm thinking, this guy's not going anywhere. He just had surgery. There's no way this is happening. And he goes, I'm definitely going to make it. And Bobby was there, and Alexis was there, and we're all like, yeah, sure, Basil. And that kind of, wouldn't that be nice? And he went to Úbeda. And he had this magnificent concert. And he emailed me when it was over and talked about how the fans were so great. He couldn't believe people were lining up for his autographs. And he was playing Conan to picture. This is not an easy thing to do if you're in good health, not when you're in really, really sick state. But he talked about it was one of the greatest experiences of his life. And then a few weeks later, he passed away. And if you made up a story about somebody, you couldn't make up a happier ending to somebody's life than him having the miracle in Úbeda.
I wanted to say to everyone in Úbeda, Spain, hola, I guess, right? Is that Spanish? Yeah. Hola, and thank you so much for honoring my father. As I feel like I love him and honor him, I feel like you love him and honor him too. So thank you.